2004, the company was still in a fledgling state. We were making money maybe like every third or fourth month. It was still sort of hand to mouth, but we were starting to see reorders for the Mini Moog Voyager. And I remember in November of 2004, we started really beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
The synthesizer market was much different than it is today. I think it was still much more dominated by large digital workstations and digital synthesizers. Pure analog synthesizers were still much more marginalized.
You know, certainly there was no iPhone, iPad stuff. Software synths were in a computer box or in a laptop. Hardware synths there were virtual analog synthesizers, you know, still a lot of sample playback synths, which there are today. The Voyager was an oddball. The Little Phatty was continuing our legacy of designing things that we just want to make, whether or not the rest of the synth world is, you know, doing that. Yeah, we weren't really concerned with that. We knew it was going to be a cool tool and would stand on its own.
I'm saddened that we're here today to talk about the discontinuation of the Little Phatty. Discontinuing the Little Phatty brings back a lot of memories from a really tough time in the company, really tough time. Lots of late nights and lots of sleepless nights on the part of anybody that was really involved in a serious way with the company.
The Little Phatty represents to me a continuation of the work we were doing with Bob, and it also represents kind of the next step that, you know, life goes on and you have to keep getting better.
The Little Phatty was a statement that Bob's work was alive and well, and that was quite literally the most important thing for Moog to get right.
Bob told me that he was sick on April 30th, 2005, so I remember that day really, really well. And you know, the effect that had on the company was monumental. Obviously, you know, who knows what's going to happen when the founder and the chief technical officer of a company all of a sudden is no longer there. It was surreal, to say the least.
You know, we started the Little Phatty with Bob, you know, all these conversations and getting the product specified to a degree, and then he got sick. It was clear that we needed to proceed for the company to survive. Losing him really, it sucked. And
I miss him every single day. I miss talking to him every single day. It's very difficult when you have a partner that you really are comfortable with, to then all of a sudden realize there is nobody else to talk to about this.
As plan B, Bob knew Cyril and was interested in bringing him on board, and so we brought him on board, and he became the leader of engineering, and he still is.
When Bob got sick, Mike called me up. I drove up the next day and met with him, and I started working that day.
Cyril is an engineering physicist from Cornell, just like Bob was. So he understood right away that Bob was designing circuits not in the traditional electrical engineering manner, but from a physical level at the specification componentry level.
And actually, you know, one of the funny stories about meeting Bob was I was designing a circuit for Duke University which measures the sonic signatures of lightning as it propagates through the atmosphere. And I said, well, this is something I just was working on recently, and I showed him the schematic. You know, Bob was so kind of understated, and he was looking at the laptop, and this kind of funny, knowing smile came across his face. And I didn't think too much about it. But it wasn't until I actually started working here that I realized the circuits that he was looking at were almost identical to circuits that he'd put in some of his instruments, just by pure coincidence.
One of the things that Bob said to me was, this guy intuitively will understand our circuits because he's been working in it for the last 10 or 15 years.
Once the design was proceeding without Bob, we made a lot of the decisions trying to keep true to his spirit about engineering and about making tools for musicians. So we were trying to do right by him, even though he wasn't there helping us out.
I guess maybe the word would be scared to death. In life, you have a choice of either putting one foot forward and continuing, or retreating into a little hole, you know. And You know, at that point, we had a company.
Though Bob's passing was very difficult, especially for the people that knew him very well, like Steve, Mike, it was incredibly inspiring that this became a manifestation of those feelings.
We had already had a specification for what we thought the Little Phatty should be. I was the author of that based on conversations with Bob. The name Little Phatty was a conversation between me and a colleague from another company. I was thinking mini Moog. Moog's known to be fat, mini little. Haha, Little Phatty. It just popped out. I came back from that trip, said to Mike and Bob, I was like, I think I might have the name for the next synth.
Well, let me say about the name of the Little Phatty. You know, it's probably not the greatest name in hindsight, but back in, you know, when we named it back in 2005, I guess it was, just seemed like fun and irreverent, and we liked fun and irreverent.
I learned not to read too much into forum comments after that synth came out or we announced it. There was one person who says, "It's the worst synthesizer name in history." Wow. So I have the honor of coming up with the worst synthesizer name in history. And that's not entirely true. I think there's been some challenges to that title. Well, Bob thought it was funny, and he thought it was an appropriate name for a synth from our company. This particular prototype was after Cyril had joined us. This panel that you see is actually, you know, my design. It's kind of remarkably similar to where the Sub Phatty ended up being, which is kind of, that tickles me a little bit.
We had to try a lot of ideas. You know, we start with Bob's sound engine and then start modifying it and controlling it in different ways and exploring different aspects of the design.
The Little Phatty Tribute Edition had a thing called real analog control. In order to make presets on a synthesizer like this, all the potentiometers have to go through what's called an A to D converter, analog to digital converter.
This was my first analog to digital converter, which takes analog voltages and turns them into numbers so that you can control via computer or what have you.
So basically the position becomes a digitized value. That's updated in a certain amount of time, you know, it depends on the processor and how fast you're going. At the time, the processors weren't quite as fast and weren't quite as powerful. So it was common if you had a whole bunch of these potentiometers, you had to do what's called multiplexing, which essentially lowers the time resolution that you have. And so sometimes you can hear some artifacts or something like that. You know, the original idea for the synthesizers, though, was it was not going to have presets, and it would be this knob directly wired to the circuit it controls. At the time, I was like, well, what if you're scanning this, then you know when it's being moved, right? You could sense when a pot is being moved. And if you can sense when a pot's being moved, then you can say, oh, why don't you switch over the path, the electrical path to control the synthesizer circuit straight over to the pot. So there's actually little switches in there that are controlled by logic that senses when the pot's actually moved. And it knows then, okay, wait, it's being moved, I'll go straight to that pot. And so the result is a real smooth feeling control. And then the digital and analog aspects are calibrated to be very close to each other so that when that switch occurs, you don't hear you don't even notice it. It's a very subtle thing that if we were to turn that off in the Little Phatty, you would hear a difference, especially when you tweak the filter control. So a good example of a parameter where that's really crucial. You know, on the source, you select a parameter, and then there's one big knob. And then I had the idea that, oh, well, you know, it kind of stinks to have just one knob. You might want to do more than one thing at once. So why don't we have a knob per module, essentially? So that's what you see on the Little Phatty. You're editing within a module.
Another fun thing you notice on the prototype is this knob labeled fat. The word seems a little dated now, but in 2005, fat was pretty cool.
This says fat, which is, we changed that to overload, which is, I think, a good move. Originally, the overload was literally like the old overload trick on the Mini Moog, where you just fed back the output into the mixer to drive the filter harder. And you get clipping in the mixer and in the filter. Turns out square waves don't sound so awesome with that trick, so we added an extra circuit. In fact, that is the original overload circuit So actually, the first circuit I designed, it's kind of funky. The first time anybody got to play a Little Phatty was a prototype, and it was at a Frankfurt Music Messe show. We showed up in Frankfurt, we have a prototype, not working all the way.
The thing that's funny about the story is like we were so focused on getting it working, and you know, we had to like solder these connectors. This was my make or break it moment, you know, in a hotel room in Germany with a huge soldering iron. And then I just looked at Steve and said, if you know, the chances of this working is really small, and if it doesn't work, that's it for the trade show. But the funny thing was, like, you know, it made sound and Steve jumping up and down, and then it was like, oh shit, now we need presets.
I don't remember jumping on the bed, actually. So I was up till 3 or 4 in the morning designing sounds for the trade show floor. In retrospect, I'm smiling at the time. I was gritting my teeth. We were crazy.
I think we all knew that we really had to get this one right. And there was so much to learn in every aspect.
When we launched the product, we launched it without Bob, and we just wanted to pay tribute to him. We wanted to honor his memory, because, you know, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. And, you know, he worked his butt off for us, and we're working, we still work our butts off to carry on, you know, what he started. The discontinuation of the Little Phatty is like the end of an era for us.
This was the instrument that had to define who we were moving forward, and it was our statement that Bob's work was alive, it was well, and that we were going to continue on.
I don't think we could have done this without Bob's spiritual support and the support of the synth community and the support of all the people that actually knew Bob and worked on this.
The achievement doesn't exist with what we do. We're making stuff. The achievement is in the folks who take what we do and make music with it. I mean, it exists in their imagination, musicians and producers who take a tool and say, oh, I can do this, or, what happens if I do this? And that's the real achievement. Okay, so we're not going to make them anymore, but you can still have a grand old time with the Little Phatty.